Welcome to the deep dive. If you're tuning in today, you're on a very specific, challenging, and honestly super rewarding journey. You are training to become a therapist.
Yeah, it's a huge undertaking, right?
It really is.
Yeah.
And one of the most jarring realities you're going to face when you finally, sit in that chair across from your clients is that manipulation almost never looks the way society trains us to expect it to.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
We're raised on this, like, cinematic idea of a control freak.
Right. The mustache twirling villain.
Yeah, or someone just screaming, making overt threats, maybe, I don't know, explicitly forbidding their partner from leaving the house.
Like loud and obvious.
Exactly. You see the strings being pulled. But in the therapy room, the manipulation your clients describe is going to be incredibly murky.
So murky, because the most uncomfortable truth about manipulation is that when it's actually happening, the most effective perpetrators make the victim feel like they are making the self-destructive decisions all on their own.
Which, I mean, that's the ultimate illusion of control. And for a therapist in training, learning to see through that illusion and, more importantly, helping your client see through it is arguably one of the most vital clinical skills you can develop. You have to listen beneath the surface.
Which brings us to the mission of today's deep dive. We have a brilliant piece of source material today, a psychological breakdown titled 7 Ways People Manipulate You Without You Realizing.
It's a great read.
Yeah.
Really breaks down how these invisible dynamics operate in everyday interactions.
Friendships,
Yeah.
toxic family systems, romantic relationships, it's all in there. And our goal today isn't to, define basic psychological terms for you. You already know the textbook definitions.
Right, you don't need a vocab lesson.
Exactly. Our goal is to equip you to spot how these subtle patterns actually present clinically. We want to explore how these tactics weaponize a client's own virtues against them. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
We're skipping the exaggerated internet tropes, starting with how a manipulator uses a person's fundamental desire to just be a good person to completely erode their boundaries.
It's a brilliant, if highly destructive, mechanism. And it almost always starts at the boundary line with a manufactured sense of guilt.
So tactic 1 in the source.
Yeah, tactic 1. Guilt for saying no. The source lays out a scenario you are going to hear constantly in your practice. A client will come to you spiraling because they set a perfectly reasonable boundary.
Like someone asked for a favor and they just couldn't do it.
Right. They were exhausted, overwhelmed with their own life, so they politely declined. Now, a securely attached, healthy person hears a no and says, I totally understand, maybe next time.
But the manipulator doesn't yell, they sigh.
The infamous heavy sigh.
Right. Or they look down, get very quiet, and deliver a line like, well, it's fine, I just thought you were someone I could actually count on.
Ugh, brutal.
It is. And in one single sentence, the entire focus of the interaction has shifted. It is no longer about a practical scheduling conflict. It's suddenly an indictment of the client's self-worth.
And your client is sitting on your couch wondering, wait, am I a bad friend? Am I selfish?
Exactly. And usually to make that horrible feeling of guilt disappear, they retroactively collapse their own boundary and agree to the favor.
What's fascinating here is the underlying mechanics of that guilt. Guilt, in this specific context, is not a biological signal that the client has done something morally wrong.
Right. It's synthetic.
Exactly. It's a synthetic emotion created by the manipulator. It's simply the emotional toll booth the manipulator sets up to punish the victim for daring to have a boundary.
I love that phrase, the emotional toll booth.
Yeah, you want to say no. You want to protect your energy. That's fine. But you have to pay the toll. And the toll is feeling like a terrible human being.
Manipulators understand that most people naturally want to be seen as kind and reliable. They aren't attacking your client's weaknesses. They're weaponizing their virtues.
And when a client tells you they feel incredibly guilty for setting a boundary, a crucial intervention is helping them realize that feeling guilty doesn't actually equate to being guilty.
Right. There is a vast psychological difference between someone experiencing genuine disappointment because they couldn't get help.
And someone actively weaponizing their disappointment to control your behavior.
Exactly. And that manipulation of generosity, it rarely stops at just one guilt trip. It bleeds into the gradual incremental erosion of boundaries, the foot-in-the-door technique.
Right, which relies heavily on a psychological concept called consistency bias.
So let's explore how that presents in everyday life. It starts so harmlessly, right? A tiny favor. You lend a friend a sweater, no big deal.
Sure.
A few weeks later, they ask if they can store a couple of boxes in your garage just for the weekend. You already lent them the sweater, you're a helpful person, so you say yes.
And then it's sleeping on your couch for a few days.
And suddenly, they've been living in your living room for a month, eating your food, and you feel entirely trapped. Because the victim has already said yes to the first three requests, refusing the fourth feels profoundly uncomfortable.
The precedent of access has been established.
Yeah, it's like signing up for a free trial of a streaming service, and suddenly you're paying for a premium package you never wanted, but you feel like you can't cancel.
That is a perfect analogy.
Thanks. So, as a therapist guiding a client, how do you help them realize that previous generosity doesn't obligate them to future demands?
Well, the boundary has been moved an inch at a time, bypassing their alarm system. You have the delicate task of helping them untangle healthy reciprocity from toxic obligation.
Because healthy human connection does rely on reciprocity.
Absolutely it does. But pushing boundaries until a small, isolated yes morphs into a blanket permission slip for relentless demands.
Yeah.
That crosses the line into manipulation.
You essentially have to teach the client a fundamental rule of autonomy. A previous yes does not permanently revoke your right to say no.
Say it again for the people in the back.
Right. Just because a client agreed to help yesterday does not mean they are legally bound to agree today. They are allowed to dynamically update their boundaries based on their current capacity.
But once a manipulator has used guilt or incremental pressure to cross a boundary, they inevitably need a defense mechanism to make sure that boundary stays open.
Which brings us to the cognitive manipulation tactics: questioning reality and shifting blame. Tactics 2 and 6.
Yeah, if the client finally finds the courage to push back, the manipulator has to quickly warp reality to maintain their control.
So tactic 2 is gaslighting. You already know the textbook definition of gaslighting, but when your client describes it in the room, they aren't going to use that term.
No, they're going to tell you they think they're losing their mind.
Yes. They'll describe a scenario where they remember a hurtful comment perfectly. They gather the courage to bring it up to their partner, and the partner just stares blankly and says, "I never said that."
Or, you're remembering it wrong, you always blow things out of proportion.
Or the absolute classic, "You're just being way too sensitive."
If that happens consistently enough, the client's brain starts to doubt its own recording equipment. They start wondering if it really is all in their head.
And the ultimate terrifying danger here, according to the source, is that the victim eventually outsources their reality testing to the very person who is harming them.
They no longer trust their own perception.
Yeah.
So they rely on the manipulator to tell them what actually happened, how they should feel, what is real.
It's so destabilizing. And the source introduces Tactic 6, which takes this a step further by turning the victim's reality into the victim's fault. It's an acronym that will be essential for your diagnostic toolkit.
Oh, DARVO.
Yes. Deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender.
It is an absolute masterclass in conversational sleight of hand.
It really is. Imagine your client initiates a conversation to address a genuine hurt. They say, "It really hurt me when you mocked my career in front of our friends."
And the manipulator immediately deploys DARVO. First, they deny it happened.
Then they attack. "I was just making a joke. You're always trying to start a fight."
Then comes the reversal. Actually, it's exhausting being with someone who constantly criticizes me. You hurt me all the time.
And suddenly, the client who initiated the conversation to address their own pain finds themselves frantically apologizing for some entirely unrelated issue from 6 months ago.
Just to calm the other person down.
Exactly. The original issue completely vanishes, replaced by a makeshift trial where the victim is suddenly the one on the witness stand.
What makes DARVO so insidious is that it weaponizes the victim's capacity for self-reflection. A good person is willing to look at their own faults, right? The manipulator exploits that willingness to hijack the conversation and evade all accountability.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate here for a second, because this is where clinical work gets incredibly murky.
Oh, for sure.
As a new therapist sitting in the room, it can be really difficult to parse out what's actually happening when a client tells a story about a fight, because human memory is inherently fallible.
True. People genuinely do misremember conversations.
Right. And in most messy, normal human conflicts, both parties probably do have some fault, and people naturally get defensive when confronted.
Yeah, that's just human nature.
So how is a new therapist supposed to distinguish between a normal, messy, defensive human argument and systemic gaslighting, or DARVO?
This is a critical distinction to make, and it's one of the hardest things to learn early in your career. The answer lies entirely in the pattern, not the isolated incident.
The pattern.
You cannot analyze a single argument in a vacuum to determine who has the objectively correct memory of an event. You have to look at the meta-communication.
So break down how that meta communication looks in a healthy dynamic versus a toxic one.
Well, healthy people, even when they get highly defensive or embarrassed initially, have a baseline capacity to eventually take accountability.
They can regulate their nervous system.
Exactly. They calm down and they can say, "You're right, I was out of line, I shouldn't have said that, and I'm sorry."
They can acknowledge a mistake without needing to prove that the other person is fundamentally flawed.
Precisely. With the manipulator systematically using Darvo or gaslighting, the answer to the question, can this person ever admit they're wrong without a caveat, is always no.
Always no.
If every single conversation about their behavior somehow ends with your client apologizing, that is not a messy human conflict. That is a systemic, rigid refusal of accountability.
It's not about the facts of the argument, it's about the function of the argument. A healthy person argues to resolve an issue. A manipulator argues to maintain dominance.
And the goal of gaslighting isn't to win a debate over empirical facts. It's to exhaust the victim into submission.
Wow. And if gaslighting and Darvo exhaust the client's mind, the next set of dynamics we need to look at completely exhaust their nervous system.
The weaponization of presence and absence.
Right. The source material outlines how manipulation isn't just rooted in conflict and arguing. The most potent manipulation is deeply tied to affection.
This is so crucial for understanding why clients stay in these toxic dynamics for so long, even when they logically know it's destroying them.
Let's look at tactic 4. Offering too much attention, too quickly, often recognized as love bombing. In the early stages of the relationship, the manipulator wants to know everything about the victim,
They're texting constantly, showering them with praise.
making the victim feel incredibly special, seen, and understood. The text notes that this artificially engineers a deep, intense attachment long before genuine earned trust has actually had time to develop.
But then, inevitably, the golden pedestal is kicked out from under them, and the warmth turns to freezing coldness.
Which brings us to tactic 3, silence to make you chase.
That coldness often manifests as the silent treatment. And the text makes a brilliant, vital distinction here between healthy space and manipulative silence.
Because a client might easily confuse the two, right? Healthy space is communication. It's someone saying, I'm really overwhelmed right now, my nervous system is flooded, I need to take a walk, but we will talk about this tonight.
Right, that provides security. You know they're coming back.
Exactly, but manipulative silence.
Manipulative silence is an aggressive punishment. The manipulator disappears without explanation. They ignore text messages, they physically turn away, they withhold all warmth.
And the psychological cruelty of this tactic is that the manipulator doesn't even have to accuse the victim of a specific crime.
No, the victim doesn't know what they did wrong. So their own mounting anxiety rushes in to fill that void.
They replay every interaction in their head, they invent imaginary mistakes they might have made.
And eventually the anxiety becomes so unbearable that they apologize for things they didn't even do just to restore the baseline of communication.
The victim does all the work of subjugating themselves, driven purely by the terror of that silence.
Which sets the stage for the dynamic that the text calls the most psychologically complicated tactic of all. Tactic 7, intermittent reinforcement.
It combines the extremes of love bombing and punishing silence into a wildly addictive cycle. When the manipulator is good, they are amazing.
But then they become distant, critical, and cold, only to return with that intense affection right at the exact moment the victim's spirit is breaking.
Right when they're about to give up. The source compares this dynamic to a casino, and from a neurobiological perspective, that analogy is perfect.
It maps perfectly onto how dopamine works in the human brain. I mean, if a slot machine lost every single time you pulled the lever, you'd walk away.
There's no reward, so the behavior extinguishes.
And if it paid out the exact same amount every single time, you'd eventually get bored. The thrill is gone.
But the unpredictable payout, not knowing if this pull of the lever is the one that brings back the jackpot, the love bombing phase.
That unpredictability creates a massive dopamine spike. That's what keeps a person pulling the lever until they are entirely bankrupt.
When I read that in the source material, it struck me how heartbreaking this is to witness as a therapist, because your clients aren't actually attached to the daily, cold, punishing treatment they are receiving.
No, not at all.
They are attached to the possibility of getting the good days back.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of clinical work, this is the exact reason why leaving a manipulative relationship is so agonizing.
Yeah.
When you're sitting with a client who keeps going back to a toxic partner, you have to understand that they aren't just leaving a person. They are in mourning.
Mourning what exactly?
They are mourning the death of the possibility that the manipulator will finally become who the client so desperately hoped they would be. They're grieving the phantom relationship they were promised during the love bombing phase.
Wow. Until a therapist can help them grieve that illusion, they will stay stuck in the real abusive reality,
Exactly.
grieving the possibility. That is a profound reframe for a clinician to hold on to because it shifts the internal clinical focus.
That really does.
Instead of feeling frustrated and silently wondering, why don't you just leave? You can hold space and ask, what is it you are having so much trouble saying goodbye to? It removes the judgment and replaces it with profound empathy.
And as we move into the final realizations from the source material, there's a concept that is incredibly important for any new therapist to grasp about the perpetrators themselves.
Okay, lay it on me.
We've talked about all these tactics: weaponized guilt, gaslighting, DARV, intermittent reinforcement. It sounds like a highly coordinated playbook for an evil mastermind, right?
Totally. Like they're sitting in a dark room plotting.
But the source explicitly points out a complex truth. Not all manipulators are doing that. Many people manipulate entirely unconsciously.
They're just running a script they were handed.
Yes. This is where the messy complexity of human behavior really reveals itself in the therapy room. Many perpetrators manipulate because they learn these severely unhealthy communication styles, often in childhood, from their own dysregulated parents.
So they learned early on that giving someone the silent treatment is the only way to get your emotional needs met.
Or they learn that playing the victim is the only safe way to avoid severe punishment for a mistake.
So it's generational trauma presenting as manipulation. Now, as the source rightly emphasizes, understanding the origin does not make the behavior healthy.
No, not at all. It does not excuse the profound damage it causes to their partners or children.
But understanding that manipulation is often a deeply ingrained, learned defense mechanism rather than conscious, malicious sadism that helps a therapist maintain clinical objectivity.
That objectivity is crucial, especially because the manipulator's tactics can be so well camouflaged.
Right, if manipulators aren't always wearing a neon sign, and if the tactics are actively designed to feel invisible, how does a client or a therapist actually diagnose that a dynamic is fundamentally destructive?
The source argues that the clearest sign of manipulation isn't actually found in analyzing what the manipulator says. The ultimate diagnostic tool is looking at who the victim becomes around them.
You have to look at the somatic response, the nervous system impact.
That is the ultimate litmus test. The focus shifts entirely from analyzing the perpetrator's behavior to analyzing the victim's internal state.
Because a manipulator's tactics can constantly shapeshift to fit the situation.
But the corrosive effect on the victim's self-concept remains remarkably consistent.
You ask your client to look inward. Do they feel chronically anxious around this person? Do they slowly stop trusting their own memory or judgment?
Do they find themselves constantly apologizing for things they know they didn't do just to keep the peace?
Do they become terrified to say no to simple requests? In short, are they slowly making themselves disappear just to keep someone else comfortable?
So what does this all mean for our listener? For the therapist in training who has a client sitting across from them describing this exact phenomenon of slowly disappearing into a toxic dynamic.
What is the ultimate intervention here? How do you help them break the spell?
The goal, as the text beautifully points out, is not to make your clients deeply suspicious of every single person they meet.
Right. It's not about inducing paranoia or assuming everyone has ulterior motives.
The ultimate intervention you can offer them is teaching them the power of the pause.
Just pause. It sounds deceptively simple.
It does, but it violently disrupts the entire manipulative feedback loop. Before saying yes to that favor that makes their stomach drop, pause.
Before frantically apologizing to fill a punishing, terrifying silence, pause.
Before chasing someone who is deliberately pulling away to trigger their anxiety, pause.
And in that space, you help them ask the grounding question. Am I doing this because I genuinely want to, or because someone has made me feel like I have no choice?
Am I doing this because I want to, or because I have no choice? That is the antidote right there.
You're taking their nervous system off of autopilot. You are helping them reclaim their agency in that tiny split-second gap between the manipulator's stimulus and the client's trauma response.
Because once a client can safely observe the pattern from that pause state, they cannot unsee it. The cinematic illusion is broken, and the reality of the manipulation is laid bare.
Wow. Okay, to summarize what we've unpacked today from this incredible source material, Manipulation thrives in the shadows of our best intentions.
It really does.
It relies on a client's fundamental desire to be good, using synthetic guilt to slowly erode their boundaries. It relies on creating cognitive confusion, using gaslighting and Darvo to make them doubt their own reality and absorb blame that isn't theirs.
And it relies on a potent, neurobiologically addictive mix of punishing silence and intermittent affection to keep them tethered to a possibility that doesn't actually exist.
But by teaching your clients to recognize these clinical presentations and by empowering them with the pause, you help strip these tactics of their power. You help them remember who they are.
And you give them permission to trust their own minds again.
Well, to our listener, thank you for bringing this source material to us. It is going to be incredibly valuable as you move forward in your clinical practice. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to chew on before your next training session or clinical supervision.
Oh, Regal.
We've spent this entire time talking about how you can help your clients spot these manipulative tactics out in the world, in their families and personal lives. But what happens when a client unconsciously brings these exact same tactics into the therapy room?
Ooh, that's a great question.
If a client starts using Darvo when you gently challenge them, or uses punishing silence on you during a session to avoid taking accountability for their actions, how do you treat the very defense mechanism that is actively trying to manipulate the treatment itself?
Now, that is the beautifully murky reality of human behavior.
And very soon, you'll be the one in the chair navigating it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.